Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode. Today we're going to be working on my 2021 Mini GP. We'll be installing a set of 12.5mm wheel spacers on all four corners with the extended lug bolts. I'm running a slightly different tire setup as I'm using a 225/40/18 on the style 590 wheels, so I'm upsized on the sidewall by one, and the factory size would have been 225/35. The factory wheel size is 18/8 with an offset of an ET39, so using these 12.5mm spacers will land us as an ET26.5. I think we can all agree that the factory wheel offset is a little bit on the conservative side, so my purpose and goal here was to try and bring the tire and wheel face out closer to the fender line. Okay, we all like this part when we get a new package that arrives. I went with the ECS tuning kit. It comes with 4 wheel spacers in the extended 12.5mm length, as well as the 20 necessary extended lug bolts that are the 40mm shank length. This is the full kit. You're going to get 4 12.5mm wheel spacers in the 5x112 bolt pattern and the 66.6mm hub bore. Also, you're going to be getting all 20 necessary M14 40mm extended lug bolts. You won't be able to reuse your OEM lug bolts with anything other than maybe a 3mm spacer, but really you're looking to gain somewhere around a 25mm length of thread bite, and the OEM size is 27mm. These are made really well, and I actually really like the black finish on these since they match up to the look of the black-faced wheel. Share my opinion on this too. Unless you're going to run a 3 or a 5mm spacer, you really want to jump up to a 12mm or larger spacer that has a larger flange for the OE wheel bearing flange to go through the wheel spacer and increase the contact surface area for strength. Otherwise, if you go with something like an 8 or a 10, there's nowhere for that flange to really sit on. The other thing worth noting about these spacers is you'll see there's a couple of indentations on the back side of this. It makes for putting a flathead screwdriver or a pry tool to pull these back off of the car when you want to remove them much easier. Here's something else to consider when you're thinking about your spacer thickness and fitment. The OEM bolt is 27mm in length, and as you can see, this one has a 40mm length. You're only going to be able to get away with maybe 3mm of spacer thickness with the OEM bolt. Otherwise, you're looking for something that's going to fully seat into the car to hold the wheel on properly. All right, let's start diving into it. I'm using a 17mm non-marring socket on a breaker bar, and I'm basically just looking to crack every one of these bolts about 1/8 of a turn before I get the vehicle up in the air. I'm using the Daytona low profile floor jack. This is great for Mini Coopers, and if you have a GP1, you can usually drive the front tire up onto a block and get this jack under it, so I highly recommend it for lowered cars. Something else that you guys might want to consider purchasing are these wheel alignment pin tools. When you go to take this wheel off of the car, it reduces the chances of the inner barrel ever making contact with the brake caliper and damaging it or scratching the inner barrel of the wheel. Here's a little profile of what that looks like. I usually try to get 2 on per wheel, but for demonstration purposes of this video, I just threw 1 in. It still works great. Next up, we want to clean up the wheel bearing hub surface here. The wheel spacer is going to sit directly onto this, so we want to actually make sure it's free of any debris, but we're going to put on some new anti-seize in that area. I'm using the Permatex brand anti-seize compound. I'm just going to go around the hub center here and coat it up, and then I'll add just a few dabs to the front face of it to where the wheel spacer will make contact with this area to make it easier to remove later. Straightforward here, we're just going to put the wheel spacer up against the face of the brake rotor hub and then just put our wheel centering pin alignment tool back in place. Time to remount the factory wheels and tires back on. I've added a little bit of anti-seize to the hub bore of the wheel itself, which will make contact with the front face of the spacer. And then I'm just going to hand tighten the newly supplied bolts back in place and just use a star pattern by hand, and then I'll go back and actually use a torque bar on this. Everything about the rear wheel process will be exactly the same, so I'll just let you go through this a second time so you can see everything that's happening. The most important part to this last step is getting the torque settings right on your wheel lugs. You're going to need 103.3 pound-feet of torque is what the factory calls for. Go around each one of these wheels in a star pattern and bolt them down. And then I'm going to lower the car back onto the ground under its own weight and do it again. And then I'll drive the car and I'll do it one last time. Alright, this next quick little part is just a time-lapse video of me doing it all over again on the driver's side of the vehicle. Alright, we're all finished, and as you can see on the left-hand side is the before, and on the right-hand side is the after, and you'll notice how much more the wheels stick out. However, they're still inside of the fenders. You may be able to get away with a 15mm or even an 18mm spacer. However, I didn't want to encounter any rubbing whatsoever. Just some quick takeaways that I've noticed since driving the car with the spacers on the car. There is ever so slightly reduced amount of torque steer, and the car does have a little bit more compliancy, and it's probably just from the mechanical leverage of having more of the tire sit outward from the fulcrum point of the suspension components. But we are talking negligible differences here, just something that I noticed. Also keep in mind, I am running that 225/40 tire, which is slightly taller than the 225/35, and I have absolutely no rubbing or problems whatsoever, even with both passengers in the car and a full tank of gas. Well, that wraps things up here for me. I hope this video helped you guys out, maybe made you make a decision on to whether or not you should run spacers at all, or even something larger or smaller than what I'm running. But I'll get back to making some more content for you guys. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe button, and I'll see you on the next one.